Hello. Now, I recently seen a poll on MSN.com that where it was asked if any fraud in the food stamp system justified a cut. Over 70% of the people said any fraud at all justifies a cut to food stamps. Now, any fraud at all, they said, justified a cut. Now, I know there's food stamp fraud. I know people who have participated in food stamp fraud. I know people who have sold their food stamps for alcohol, drugs, and cigarettes. I know people who blatantly lied to the government to get more food stamp money. I'm not going to reveal names because most of them I don't remember and because that's not what I should do. Not even to the government. But any fraud at all. Now let's take that logic. The logic. Any fraud at all should make a cut to whatever it is. And let's place it in other institutions. First, let's go to schools. Any fraud at all. Now, I'm going to include fraud such as theft of office supplies, such as calling in sick when you're not sick, stuff like that. So let's go to school. I've known teachers who have stolen office supplies. I've known teachers who've called in sick when they weren't sick. I know teachers who's canceled classes because they wanted to smoke. And I constitute all that as fraud. So I guess since there is fraud, there needs to be a cut to teachers and salaries. So let's fire a third of the teachers and cut their salaries in half since there's fraud. You don't like that one? Well, let's go to the government. Any fraud at all. There's been people in Congress, presidents, judges, all who've taken bribes, all who's voted to uphold their political party over the Constitution, which directly violates an oath they took when they took office. And there are people who voted in order to help themselves and not the country. So there's fraud. So let's cut the government workers by half. Government workers, politicians, stuff like that by half. Because government workers steal office supplies and once again waste time when working, which is technically time theft and is fraud. So let's cut all the government stuff in half, cut their pay down to minimal, and say, well, it's fraud, it deserves cut. Let's think about other fraud we've seen. I worked as a janitor for many, many years. And I've known many janitors. And just about all the ones I know have ordered extra supplies for wherever they're cleaning so they could take some home with them. So let's fire all janitors. That's fraud. They've also lied about their hours, saying they worked more when really they sat on their butt and smoked. So they lied about hours. They stole some supplies. That's fraud. Let's fire all janitors. Let's cut the supplies company gets by a third. Now, that's going to end up with a lot of people running out of toilet paper, but it's fraud and it deserves a cut. You know, this logic, when we move it on to other things besides food stamps and welfare, it doesn't function. You know, the Catholic Church has a long history of fraud and lies. Many churches claim to take donations to the poor, and then they build a new temple, they build new bells, they build a new electronic digital sign, and they claim that money's going to the poor, and we can clearly see it isn't. But we don't say, let's get rid of churches. We don't say, let's fire all janitors, let's get rid of the government, you know, let's cut teachers' hours, pay, whatever. So as you can see, the fraud analysis doesn't hold water when applied logically to other aspects. Now, Another thing about food stamps and welfare is the government social programs. And government social programs are actually a good thing. Most were created out of the Great Depression, and here's a quick history lesson. During the Great Depression, people couldn't afford bread, they couldn't afford their houses, so a lot of them would go to national parks and set up tents, beg for alms, or work on the docks or wherever they could get jobs, live up in a tent, cook on a campfire. They couldn't afford anything else. I mean, a large part of Central Park in New York during the Great Depression was one of these tent towns. They're called shanty towns, and people lived there. And they'd say, hey, we're going to shanty town. Now, this happened all over. And so these social programs like welfare and food stamps were created so they could afford their house, so they could afford to go to work and not live in these shanty towns. So when you say you want to cut welfare or you want to cut food stamps, what you're really saying is these people who can't afford better, you want them to go hungry or to live in a shanty town. Now, social programs like food stamps, welfare, Medicare, Medicaid, stuff like that is actually quite good for the economy because it means less beggars, less homeless, less people who just can't afford better and are living on the street, but can also afford to work part-time and still get by because there aren't a lot of full-time jobs. A lot of the full-time places have fired people or have cut their hours back. You know, Walmart, for one, is one of the nation's leading employers. And if you're not management, you're part-time. Now, true, some of those people do get full-time hours, but if you're not management, you're part-time. McDonald's, if you're not management, you're part-time. You know, a lot of grocery stores, a lot of factories, they don't have the work. So you work 6 or 7 months out of the year, and the rest of the year, you either better have saved money, which you can't afford to do if you have a family and you're only making $10, $11 an hour, or you're on welfare. I mean, you talk about teachers not making a lot compared with the people who are working part-time or who are only working 6 months out of the year because that's what their job is. Teachers make quite a bit. And these social programs help these people so they can afford to do that. They're not necessarily looking for better work. The work just isn't there. Social programs are also good to keep criminals away. People, they can't afford to feed their family, they can't afford to pay rent, they turn to a life of crime. You could also see this in the 20s and in the Great Depression, where there were a lot of people who turned to a life of crime, and these people were worshipped by the other people because they had money, they made money. John Dillinger, the public loved. Bonnie and Clyde practically became heroes to the public. And so these people worshiped these people because they could make money. I had to take a drink, my throat was going dry. And so giving these people money for food, giving them money to pay the rent, to take care of their children, keeps them from going out and deciding, I'm going to rob so-and-so. I'm going to kill so-and-so because he has something I want. And it reduces crime. And this is proven. It's proven that countries with strong social programs have a lower crime rate than countries that don't. England's violent crimes is a little bit higher than ours, even though they have strong social programs. But the fact of the matter is, England includes things that we don't when counting violent crime. Canada has more guns on average than America. More guns per person than America. But they have strong social programs and have less crime. This is just how it works. So the reasons for social programs are simple, and we should leave them alone, and these are the reasons. 1, they help people who can only find work part-time, which is a lot of people. 2, they help reduce the crime rate. And 3, the logic for cutting them does not hold up in other industries. That's all I wanted to say today. Goodbye.